Great. Well, my name is Eric Plante. I'm the Chief Compliance Officer of Bequant Exchange, also known as Bequant Capital before. We are moving now completely towards the cryptocurrency side. I've been in banking since 1996, so I worked for a lot of large banks, mainly in AML and compliance. And I am going to talk a little bit about crime prevention and crime mitigation on blockchain payments. So there's a lot of cryptocurrency related companies here, so I don't have to explain to them what cryptocurrencies are, but there might be a few people here who are not working with blockchain, not working with cryptocurrency. Can I see some hands? Who works? Great. So I'll give a short introduction on what blockchain is and what makes it unique versus regular payments, say so over the SWIFT network. I then will tell you a little bit about how the crime prevention side of blockchain has developed. So 4 years ago, when I started as Chief Compliance Officer of ItBit, which is an exchange now based in the US, we were looking very hard on, okay, how can we prevent criminals from misusing blockchain? One thing we absolutely need is talent in cryptocurrency, but if you are a compliance officer and you work for a bank and you have a nice steady job, because banks still offer steady jobs for compliance officers, why would you go over to a startup, and why would you go over to an industry that is so, at that point in time, definitely filled with, you know, cowboys and criminals and whatever. We had Mt. Gox at that time. Mt. Gox was the biggest crypto exchange in the world, got hacked. It was a big scandal. It almost caused Bitcoin to lose most of its value. And it also caused regulators to take notice. And as one thing you don't want as a compliance officer is for regulators to step in. The problem at that point in time was that cryptocurrency was actually created as something that moved you away from the government, away from the scrutinizing eyes of regulators and law enforcement, etc. That was the ideal of, for instance, Bitcoin at that point. Now, we are completely in a different world today. I was in New York a few weeks ago, actually already a few months ago, and there was a huge event there called Concurrence. And most of the people you saw there were wearing suits and they were talking Wall Street speak, and there were almost no techies at all anymore. Now, the first time I was in a Bitcoin conference, it was all about, okay, we are going to change the world and we're going to do away with governments, etc. So you can see the difference. However, regulation is very much important now because all the cryptocurrency exchanges want to be legal now. They want to be regulated. So how are we going to do crime prevention? A short introduction. What makes blockchain payments different from the regular payments? Now, if you see a normal international payment goes through the SWIFT network. For those of you who have worked for banks, for instance, you fill in a form, it goes through SWIFT, it uses correspondent banks if needed, and then it ends up with the receiver, hopefully within a week, sometimes even longer. It's very slow, it's very prone to errors, and it's also very expensive. And banks, of course, they love that because they can get a lot of money from that. If I send money through the bank to my account in another country, say Singapore, I lived there for 10 years, it will take maybe 4 or 5 days. It will cost me like 4%, something like that. And that is completely different with a blockchain payment. Because a blockchain payment is basically from one side to the other. It's almost instantaneously and it's very cheap. Now, how does the blockchain work? Because you really have to know how does the blockchain work to see what the difference is. In fact, a block on the blockchain is nothing more than a contained unit of data. And the data can be currency data, it can be your ID, it can be anything that can be measured and put into numbers. You put those numbers through a program that will use cryptography to generate a number. That number will be verified by the same users that are using the blockchain. I'm simplifying very much now because I have to do this in 30 minutes. But once it has been verified, it becomes a block. And the data will be put on the blockchain. Now, what makes it so unique? The next block, once it has been verified and has been part of the blockchain, will actually refer to the previous block. Without that reference, you don't have a chain. With the reference, you know that this block and the previous one are part of the blockchain. The moment that you start altering this data, it won't refer to the previous block anymore, and therefore it will fall out and the whole blockchain will either fall apart or the block itself will just be deleted or basically thrown away. So what you get here, and compliance officers love this, you have an immutable audit trail. Because whatever you do, whatever you transact on the blockchain, once the block has been approved, it becomes part of the chain forever. So that means that I, as a compliance officer, can go to a blockchain. And a blockchain is nothing more but a database. You can see it as an Excel sheet, right? And it's public, most of them at least. If I take the Bitcoin blockchain, for instance, I can go to the internet and I can download the whole blockchain as an Excel sheet, and I can see the creation of a Bitcoin, for instance, and every time it has been spent, it is part of the chain. So I have an audit trail to at least refer to see what happened to the coins that I now see that my customers, the customers of Bequant in this case, are putting in their wallets. Does it make sense? I mean, if there are any questions, let me know. So that's different from if you have a bank, for instance, you do a payment. Most of the time when I was working at ABN AMRO, for instance, with a team in Singapore, and we had a lot of payments coming in from India, I didn't know where they were coming from. So the only way you can find out more about the payments is to call the bank in India. Now, a lot of those banks at that point in time were still working with paper-based filing systems. So if you ever got an answer back, it was like 2 months later, way too late, of course. Here, you have an instantaneous record, and you can see it for yourself. You don't have to ask anybody what happened. You don't have to go to a bank to ask, okay, did you get this payment in? You don't have to go to a correspondent bank. So it is a lot more transparent. So that's an advantage. The disadvantage, of course, is that you have no connection between your customer and his wallet. A wallet is nothing more but a small piece of database that gives you control over your virtual currency on the blockchain. So what you saw, that block, if you own the private keys to that block, you can basically do a transaction, and I can send Bitcoin, for instance, from my wallet to your wallet. That will be seen on the blockchain. It will generate a transaction. The problem is nobody will know it's me. I can generate a wallet out of nowhere on my phone. Nobody will know. Now there's of course something else that does the same. That's basically cash. If I give you £100, and presuming nobody's in the room and there's no camera, nobody will know that I gave you that £100, right? Do we worry about that? Do we say we have to get away with cash? We have to do away with cash because it's all used in crime? Of course not. Now, at this point in time, we have different challenges, because if you work for a cryptocurrency company, what is your number one worry? Getting a bank account. Because we are not living in a situation where we can basically use Bitcoin to buy anything. I mean, if I go and buy a coffee at Starbucks, they won't accept Bitcoin. So what do? I have to sell my Bitcoin, and I have to get what they call fiat currency, pound sterling, for instance, buy my coffee. What do you need for pound sterling? You need a bank account. So we're basically back to step one. We have to open a bank account. Now, if any of you have ever tried to open a bank account and even mention crypto, and this includes challenger banks, by the way, more often than not you say, sorry, we don't touch crypto. So that's a big challenge. But I can understand a little bit of that, right? So what are the challenges of a cryptocurrency company? In a bank, it's simple. You have a client, you have a profile of a client. If you have a wealthy client, you ask them, okay, how do you get your wealth? How do you get your income? You can do background checks on your client. And if your client is wealthy, most of the time they're a CEO or they inherited their wealth, and that's basically it. In a cryptocurrency exchange, it's a lot more difficult because first of all, you have international clients, so they could be in any country in the world. You can't just step out and talk to your client because that would be extremely expensive. Also, the paperwork that they submit is not in an office. You don't talk to your client, it's all electronic. That's, for instance, where Onfido comes in. But you also have clients that are suddenly very wealthy. We have a lot of clients that are students, but they're millionaires. Why? Because they were smart enough to buy a few hundred Bitcoin 4 years ago. And what happened with Bitcoin? It suddenly went up like crazy. Last year, one Bitcoin was worth almost $20,000. So those guys that have a few thousand Bitcoin are suddenly very, very wealthy. Can they explain it? Very difficult. Of course, there's the blockchain, and they can say, well, I bought this then and then, but because Bitcoin is very young, they might have bought it at Mt. Gox, for instance, and there's no records anymore because Mt. Gox doesn't exist anymore. So it's very difficult to explain this. And regulators don't like that because they want to have very specific categories of client. If you're wealthy, you earned it. If you're wealthy, you inherited it. You can't just have created it out of nothing because there's no regulation that actually says, well, if your client is suddenly wealthy, he might have mined Bitcoin. There is no regulation that actually looks specifically at that. So that's a challenge because you have to convince the regulator that this is actually a valid method. He mined the Bitcoin. He had actually a computer in his home that mined Bitcoin. So now he wants to sell that Bitcoin. And it's all completely legitimate. He didn't launder it. He didn't get it from a criminal enterprise. Nothing like that. And that's a very difficult proposition to put in front of a regulator. Now, I know there are certain regulators that are changing their minds. I worked for one last year in Abu Dhabi, and they said, okay, we need to have some specific regulation around that. But that's only a few. Bequant, for instance, is looking at Malta. They just passed a law there that allows cryptocurrency to be regulated, but that's just a few. High-risk jurisdictions, how do you make sure that your client isn't from a high-risk jurisdiction? And I'm talking about money laundering, I'm talking about terrorist financing. You also get to have very high volumes, for instance. We are starting now an exchange, and already the sign-ups are coming in hard and fast. How do we do proper due diligence on a client if we have like 5,000 clients, because we have a very small team? And of course, as a startup, you don't have the money to put 2,000 people in. You get high values. Like I said, you get the client coming in saying, I want to sell 1,000 Bitcoin. That's 1,000 times, how much is a Bitcoin at the moment? $6,000? That's a lot of money. So banks don't want to touch that because for them it's high risk as well. But you need to do something to mitigate those risks. So what we have is a suite of companies, startups, most of them, that help us do due diligence. Now, first of all, of course, Onfido. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak, by the way. We are integrating Onfido on the KYC side. So if a client signs up, we are at least certain that he's not on a watch list, that his ID is verified, and that he lives where he says he lives. But that's only the start, right? Because if I were a criminal and I want to open an account, even at a bank, I'm not going there myself because I know I'm on a list. So I will send one of you. And I will say, you open an account for me. And I'm a criminal, so I know where your children live. If you do anything fishy, I know where to find them. There's actually people that make money that way. I mean, you have grandmothers in Hong Kong that sell their services to wealthy Chinese to get money out of China. There was one arrested a few years ago. She went to jail for like 20 years, but that doesn't really help because a lot of people there, they do this anyway because it pays a lot of money. Anyway, we use Elliptic afterwards. So Elliptic is one of the companies that provides information on wallet addresses. Like I said, a wallet address basically allows you as an individual to control your cryptocurrency on the blockchain. You can spend money, you can receive money, and if I say money, I mean cryptocurrency. However, without any information about who you are. So how do they do this? If you see here, this is Mt. Gox. This is basically the wallet of Mt. Gox. And what they do is they know the wallet address. So every wallet has an address, which is basically a number, like a phone number, for instance, or an email address. They know this, and they can see whenever there's a transaction to another address. Now they will find out that address as well. For legal companies, that's quite easy because if you want to know the wallet address of Coinbase, you just have to ask them, or you have to become their customer. They will give you a wallet address so you can send your cryptocurrency to the exchange or to the broker to buy and sell. So that's a public wallet address. Of course, criminals are not making their wallet addresses public that easy. What's the easiest way to get a wallet address of a criminal? Ask again, because criminals still need to sell their stuff. For instance, you have buy and sell sites like eBay, but on what they call the dark web. So the dark web is basically the part of the internet that you can't see with your browser. You need to have a specific browser for that. Once you can go into that part, you get sites, you can buy almost anything that's illegal. Drugs, assassins, anything, credit card numbers, and you pay, of course, in cryptocurrency because a lot of criminals think, well, that's a good way to stay anonymous. If that's true, I don't know. So what they do is basically they order, I don't know, an assassin or some drugs, and then they ask, okay, how do I pay you? Well, here's my wallet address. Immediately they have this wallet address and they will give it to their customers. Yes?
What used to happen before, so with the dark web before, I guess, crypto, how was that done? Was that with cash?
Well, the dark web before, it was mostly done with gift cards. So what happens a lot is you buy Amazon or Apple or Google gift cards. Those have a number as well. They have these scratch cards, right? You give that number and they will use that number to credit their account with Amazon, for instance. Then they will buy products on Amazon and they will sell those products. So it's a lot more complicated, but it has the same result. With cryptocurrency, of course, you have a direct payment. And one of the advantages of cryptocurrency is also, at least for criminals, once it's been paid, it can never be retrieved. If you have a credit card payment, you always have this clawback period, right? So I can say to my bank, my credit card was stolen, this is a payment I never done, then I get my money back, and the merchant basically is empty-handed. As a criminal, you don't want that either. So again, cryptocurrency are great that way. So they ask for Bitcoin. At the moment, they don't ask for Bitcoin anymore because they know it can be traced. One of the biggest underground selling website called Silk Road was basically completely destroyed by the FBI and the sheriff's office, and they seized a large amount of Bitcoin. Now here, actually, and this is a bit of a question, because what I do as a compliance officer, I look at my customers and I look where they get their Bitcoin from. Now, if I see that they get a lot of Bitcoin from dark websites or maybe from hacks, I look at how many steps are there in between their wallet and the wallet of the hack or the wallet of the dark web website. If they get it immediately direct, they must have basically sold something or bought something on that website, right? So what do? I ask my customer questions. If he can't answer those questions, if I'm not comfortable we will basically close their account. If needed, we will even file a suspicious activity report, a suspicious transaction report, depending on the jurisdiction where you are. So this is very important. Cryptocurrency companies are now the gatekeepers of the whole cryptocurrency infrastructure, but they're not regulated. So they don't have to do this. So there's a lot of cryptocurrency exchanges that now have a problem, because are they going to go the legal way? That means that they probably have to look back at their clients and see what they are doing using these tools, or they have to decide, okay, we are going to close all these accounts, and they are probably very, very profitable. So what are you going to do? And I think that this is the way we are going forward. There will be new exchanges that do this from scratch. And once you do it from scratch, and we do that, for instance, you can be pretty certain that the customers in your database are, well, more or less legal. Of course, there will always be, you know, people that fall through the cracks, or people that use several tools to make it more difficult to trace. But at least it's something, right? There's other companies that do the same thing. Chainalysis is also very similar. I just had a discussion about CoinFirm. CoinFirm is a company that offers risk reports on wallet addresses. Now the important thing here is you have to look at the companies and ask them, okay, where do they get their data from? Because you have to trust them, of course, and you have to trust the quality of your data. So this is a challenge that this whole industry has at the moment. How can you trust the data? How can you know what they are using? I mean, I would say look at the tools that law enforcement is using as well, for instance. I know Elliptic is used, for instance, by Interpol, by Europol. So at least I can tell the regulator, hey, we're using the same tools. If there's anything in there that doesn't satisfy the regulator, it's not our fault. I mean, we can't help but use the best tools available. Now this data, of course, you have to pay for it, but we have been in the banking industry, we have been using data providers for a long time. I mean, you have your World Checks, you have your Nice Actimize, there's a lot of that. Mantas, for instance, for AML. So you see now the startups coming in, and they're providing that information as well. So if you see traditional surveillance, about 10 years ago I started in Singapore, and I had a team of about 20 people doing nothing but anti-money laundering reports. So they sat behind their terminals and they wrote reports. But it's all after the fact, right? So you have to look at patterns, you have to look at what happened, but the money is already gone. So the only thing that you can do is you can report, well, we had payments in and they were suspicious, but you can't do anything about it. That's different with blockchain payments, because you can see the behavior real time and you can actually stop it because you know where it's coming from. Why? Because the blockchain is public. So you can see it. You can see what is happening, and you can see if anything that your customer is doing is suspicious. And if you have a system that can do that, and there's not a lot of systems on the market that actually look at behavior. There are a few companies now. There's one in Singapore called Silent 8, for instance. They look at behavior. So the moment that your customer does anything outside his profile, you get a red flag, and you can either block the transaction, or you can report him, or you can close the account, whatever you want to do. All in real time. You can do it on demand, and this is very nice for startups, because Onfido, for instance, allows us to do reports and pay for them per report. It's more expensive, but at least it allows us to scale up quicker. Because if I have to have a contract with WorldCheck, for instance, it's a 3-year contract, and it's very expensive. And if I don't use as much of the data that I actually expected to use, I'm basically paying money for nothing, right? Now I know these companies are now changing their business model, so probably they will go on demand as well. But it used to be a huge issue, especially for startups, because you don't want to sign 3-year contracts if you don't even know if you will still exist next month. APIs, of course. APIs are the motor, the engine of fintech. Everything these days is done through APIs. And you see the large companies like WorldCheck, for instance, are offering APIs as well. Not as good, but still, they do change their model. But if you look at the traditional financial industry, Swift, for instance, it's still the same old Swift network. It's changing, but it's still old and slow. And this is where fintech comes in, because everything is done through APIs. Everything can be connected. So I can make a chain, literally, by using Onfido for my onboarding, then using our CRM system, then plugging in Elliptic, plugging in other monitoring systems, all in the same system that I'm using. So it's a lot easier to make your own mix and match than integrate the system in your existing database. When I was at ABN AMRO, we integrated Mantas, for instance, which is a huge AML program. It took 2.5 years and about 200 people, and I think like $30 million just to integrate it. And then afterwards, we actually found out we forgot a few countries, which was a bit of an issue at that time. Of course, we still have remaining challenges. One of them, and I would say the most important, we have to convince regulators and banks that yes, we are using startups, yes, we are using companies that are not known names yet, however, this is the best way to do it. And this is one of the reasons why, for instance, a company like WorldCheck is still used a lot. And I'm not saying WorldCheck is bad, absolutely not. However, it's a huge company, it's expensive, but if I go to a regulator and say, hey, I use WorldCheck, they say, okay, I know what it is, I know what it can do, don't have to do anything. If I say, well, yeah, now I use Elliptic and I use Onfido, they'll use what? How? We don't know that. What can they do? What are their data sources? And like I said, you have to be very transparent with your data sources. If I say, well, we are checking all the watch lists. Oh yeah? Which ones? I don't know. I have to go back and ask. If I say, well, I use WorldCheck, they know. If I say I use whatever else is out there, I have to explain. I also have to explain how it works. And as a compliance officer, this is a completely new world, right? I mean, I used to be in compliance and the only thing you had to do is you do a little bit of onboarding, you write some policies and you say no to a lot of customers and that's about it. That's 10 years ago. Now you have to be on the forefront. I have to be, okay, I integrate this API. What do I use? A REST API? It's all very technical. And then I have to explain to a regulator who is not technical how we are doing this. It's like the internet in, say, 2000. I was part of the team that made the website for ABN AMRO. And of course we got sued because we had an investment website and somebody ordered 100 shares of something and fat fingers, 1,000 shares. Of course it's the bank that did it, right? So you go to a judge and then you have to explain what the internet is. And the guy cannot even switch his PC on. We're in the same situation now. How can I explain what a blockchain does if people only think, oh yeah, blockchain is Bitcoin and therefore it's risky? Convince regulators, very important. Another one, off-chain transactions. So you can do transactions without going to the blockchain. Of course you can't do them all from the beginning to the end, so they're not executed, but you can do it. And then I don't know exactly what happened with that certain transaction. Cross-chain transactions, so if you have Bitcoin and you buy, I don't know, Zcash or Ethereum with your Bitcoin, how do I use the trace? Because suddenly it jumps from one blockchain to another blockchain. So we need tools, and I haven't seen them yet. Maybe that's a niche. I haven't seen tools yet that can do cross-blockchain monitoring. There are websites where you can send your Bitcoin. They will collect Bitcoin from all over the place with different customers, and then they will send it out to other customers. You don't know exactly which coin belonged to whom. And those services, they call tumblers or washes, they're not really that different from what used to happen in, for instance, jurisdictions like Singapore. In Singapore, we have banking secrecy. So what people did was they would start 2 companies, open 2 bank accounts in Singapore. You send from your bank account in, say, so Indonesia, you send money to company A, then you send money from company A to company B, and you send it back. From the outside, it looks like a black box because Singapore, banking secrecy, so there's no information coming out, right? So that means that I suddenly get payments from company B, and nobody knows that I actually own both companies. Black box. Same with tumblers and washers. You send Bitcoin in, Bitcoin comes out, goes to a completely different wallet address, and you lose the trail. It's not really that different how money launderers do it as well, right? I mean, yes, you have the 3 stages of money laundering, but in reality, it's a lot more complicated than that. Not every address is captured, so if I'm a criminal and I never publish my wallet address, which is difficult because if I never publish my wallet address, how will I receive anything? If I don't give you my email address, how do you send me email? But it is possible, and of course, I mean, companies like Elliptic, they have resource constraints as well. They can't capture everything. The most important thing at this moment is there's no direct link between the wallet and the owner. I can make a wallet on my phone right now and nobody will know it's actually on my phone. Then I can receive Bitcoin or other cryptocurrency and I can send it out again. Nobody will know it's me. There is no fixed link between the owner and the wallet. So incoming payments, and this is always why I say you have to look at behavior, because if I have a customer and he says, well, this is my wallet, here's my wallet address, I will only send cryptocurrency from this wallet address. How do I know this is his wallet address? Might be from his criminal uncle in Colombia or something. No idea, and you can't prove it. So that's a real issue actually. Combine that with the fact that it's a largely unregulated industry. So if you have a jurisdiction like North Korea or Iran or Venezuela, although that's not really that illegal, but if I have somebody in North Korea mining Bitcoin, I have no idea that it's coming from North Korea because there's no direct link between this wallet and that jurisdiction. There are ways to find out, but that means that you have to go into IP addresses, you have to see where it is coming from, you have to do a very deep analysis. We compliance officers, I don't know about you guys, but I'm not really that good at coding and about looking at infrastructure, etc. There are people that are very good at that, but they're expensive. I can't have somebody coming in doing a complete analysis on each of my customers, even if it was possible. If we have a regulated industry, at least we can say, okay, our customers are only dealing with exchanges that are regulated. But even then, I mean, cash is the same thing. Even if you see that banks, HSBC just received another fine, Standard Chartered has a big problem, and they have very fine compliance teams, they have very fine financial crime teams, but criminals will use anything to, or I would say misuse anything to get ahead. So once we have the industry more or less regulated and we work with the banks, we can create a closed loop system that is a lot safer than what we have at this moment. Now I'm just plugging our own exchange. So this is the Bequant Exchange front page. Have a look, it's bequant.io. We are actually live since, when is it? Last week, I think. We are trying with this whole suite of programs to satisfy regulators, but most of all, we are trying to keep the bad guys out, keep the good guys in. Because in the end, we're not doing this for regulators, we're not doing this for law enforcement, we're doing this for ourselves. We want to be here in 20 years' time, right? We don't want to be a Mt. Gox. Well, that's my email address. You can find me on LinkedIn as well.
Perfect. Let's have a round of applause.